September 1944, Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The morning air was soaked with mist, a pale shroud drifting between broken pines. The sound came first, an echo of engines, not the deep, mechanical thunder of a tiger or a panther, but a sharper growl, thinner and faster, weaving through the trees like an animal on the hunt. Inside his Panzer IV, Feldwebel Otto Reiner leaned forward, listening beyond the crackle of the headset. Something was moving on the flank, too quickly, too lightly. A shell screamed through the fog, exploding against a ridge barely 50 meters away. His gunner swung the turret toward the flash, but by the time the crosshairs found the smoke, the attacker was gone. Then another shot. This one struck home, clean, precise, fatal. The Panzer jolted, metal splitting like bone. Reiner's world erupted into flame and smoke. He shouted, scrambled out through the hatch, and rolled down the wet embankment. Behind him, the tank that had carried him through Poland, France, and Russia burned in silence. Through the haze, he saw it, low-slung, fast, and utterly alien to the German eye. The machine darted away, its 76mm gun already seeking another target. It wasn't a Sherman, nor any known variant. Later, they would learn its name. The M18 Hellcat, America's tank destroyer built not to withstand blows, but to deliver them first. As Reiner lay in the mud, staring at the black smoke twisting above the forest, he felt the unfamiliar weight of disbelief. This wasn't the slow chess match of armored war he knew. This was speed, speed as a weapon. In the months that followed, captured German reports would echo the same astonishment. Their tanks are not tanks, they are ghosts that move faster than thought. Before we move deeper into this forgotten story, subscribe to POW Tales, where real history speaks. And beyond that burning ridge, where the forest swallowed the sound, the story of the Hellcat's creation was already waiting to be told. In the summer heat of 1943, far from the shell-cratered fields of Europe, an altogether different kind of battle was underway in Flint, Michigan. Inside the sprawling Buick assembly plant, the clang of steel and the rhythmic hiss of welders filled the air. Men in coveralls moved with the precision of an orchestra. Riveters, machinists, engineers, and draftsmen, all tuned to the same tempo, speed. The U.S. Army had ordered a new kind of tank destroyer, one that could race into ambushes, strike, and vanish before German armor could turn its turrets. The result would be the M18 Hellcat, the fastest armored vehicle of the war. The concept was radical. Instead of adding armor, designers removed it. Instead of weighing it down with heavy guns, they streamlined its frame. At full throttle, the Hellcat could reach over 55 miles per hour on open ground, twice the speed of most German tanks. Speed is our armor, engineers like to say, a phrase that would soon echo across briefing rooms from Camp Hood, Texas, to the ordnance-proving grounds of Aberdeen. At the heart of the program was a philosophy that broke with European orthodoxy. The German panzer divisions had been built on the belief that survival meant strength, thicker plates, heavier guns, meticulous precision. The Americans took a different view. Their war machine would rely on mobility, improvisation, and mass production, an industrial rhythm so vast that it could outpace the destruction of war itself. In Buick's Plant No. 4, every day saw a new row of olive-drab hulls rolling from the line, engines gleaming with the smell of hot oil and new paint. Records preserved in the U.S. National Archives reveal how quickly the project grew. A War Department memo from late 1943 noted, "The Hellcat program embodies the American advantage, speed of manufacture and movement. What had once taken German factories weeks to perfect could be turned around in days in Michigan. For every Tiger tank completed in Kassel, Detroit's lines delivered dozens of M18s, each destined for the thunder of Normandy, the bocage of France, or the narrow lanes of the Ardennes. Yet the Hellcat was more than an engineering feat. It was a reflection of America's industrial confidence. To the men assembling its parts, it was a symbol of ingenuity against the myth of invincibility that surrounded German armor. To the tank destroyer crews training in Texas, it was a promise that they could outthink and outrun their enemy. Sergeant Frank Leland of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion would later recall, "It felt like driving a fighter plane on treads. You could feel the power begging to move before you even touched the throttle." Meanwhile, the Army's training manuals shifted tone. Gone was the defensive posture of earlier doctrine. In its place came language about velocity, initiative, and mobility. The Hellcat, commanders believed, would embody the new tempo of American warfare, a tempo that turned movement itself into a weapon. But across the Atlantic, in the German command reports of 1944, whispers of the Hellcat began to surface. Light tanks moving at abnormal speed, one field message described, noting that our heavy units cannot turn or engage fast enough. What began as rumor soon spread into the tactical intelligence of panzer divisions, where officers debated whether such machines even existed. It would not be long before those rumors became smoke on the horizon, and German crews, like Otto Reiner, would find themselves facing this new kind of predator head-on. The Hellcat's creation was one side of the story. The other lay in the German belief that armor was destiny, a belief about to collide with American speed. The German Army of 1944 stood at a crossroads of tradition and desperation. Its panzer doctrine, forged in the blitzkrieg triumphs of 1940, had relied on synchronization, engineers, gunners, and commanders moving as a single machine. Yet by the time the M18 Hellcat began to arrive on the European front, that unity was faltering. Fuel shortages, Allied air attacks, and the relentless demands of defense had slowed the once feared divisions into iron fortresses that could barely move. The WWII and Panther, masterpieces of engineering, embodied that paradox. They were powerful, nearly invincible in frontal combat, but glacial in maneuver. German manuals described ideal engagement ranges in hundreds of meters, static duels fought from cover where skill and precision outweighed speed. It was a philosophy of patience. Against the M18, patience became a trap. When captured German officers were later interrogated, many admitted disbelief at the concept behind America's tank destroyers. According to a declassified report from the U.S. Army Historical Division, 1946, one officer stated, "We thought your tanks must be very light or very weak to move that fast. We did not think you would risk such fragility in battle." But that fragility was deceptive. The Hellcat's thin armor made it vulnerable, but it also meant it could relocate faster than any counterstrike could track. Its open-topped turret gave clear vision. Its speed turned ambush into art. American rearmament policy had embraced a new kind of warfare, one where quantity and adaptability could overwhelm design perfection. Factories like Buick's in Flint and General Motors in Cleveland churned out vehicles, engines, and parts with stunning efficiency. Production records from late 1944 list over 2,500 Hellcats completed in less than a year, shipped through the Great Lakes and Atlantic ports in endless convoys. By contrast, Germany's industrial network, strangled by bombing, could barely sustain its armored divisions. To the War Department, speed was not just a mechanical trait, it was a cultural one. The tank destroyer command's pamphlets taught units that to wait is to die. This ethos filtered into every crew briefing. The goal was to see first, strike first, and vanish. Their motto became seek, strike, and destroy. When the Hellcat battalions landed in Normandy, they carried not only firepower, but the distilled rhythm of American production itself, a rhythm that the Wehrmacht could no longer match. Letters from captured German POWs reflect a sense of awe and confusion. One, held at Camp Swift, Texas, in early 1945, wrote home, "The Americans think differently. Their machines move like water. They flow. We build ours like castles. Castles are beautiful, but they cannot chase ghosts." That single metaphor captured the gulf between two philosophies of war. By late summer 1944, the rumors about the Hellcat spread across the panzer units fighting in Belgium and Lorraine. Reports from the 2nd Panzer Division mentioned light tank destroyers appearing and disappearing with unnatural speed. Commanders advised heavier tanks to avoid narrow roads and forests where the Hellcats might set traps, but the warning came too late. The forests and villages of France had become hunting grounds for the swift and the agile. Still, on the ground, the Hellcat was no invincible wonder. Crews operated in open turrets, exposed to small arms fire and shrapnel. They fought with thin armor that could be pierced by nearly any German gun. Survival depended entirely on motion and nerve, qualities that mirrored the American temperament in war, audacious, restless, and relentless. And while the German High Command still pinned its hopes on engineering miracles like the King Tiger or jet-powered prototypes, the truth was that a new kind of warfare had arrived, one defined not by weight, but by momentum. In the autumn fog of 1944, that momentum would meet the forests of Europe, where Reiner and his crew would finally understand what American speed truly meant. The descent begins with the first encounters in France, when the hunters became the hunted. October 1944, Lorraine, France. The wind swept through the narrow lanes of the French countryside, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder and damp soil. Feldwebel Otto Reiner's Panzer rolled cautiously down a ruined road, flanked by hedgerows blackened from artillery fire. Each kilometer brought new unease. Reports had spread through the regiment that an American unit was harassing convoys, striking with uncanny speed before fading into the forest. Men joked about ghost tanks, but few laughed long. Reiner's gunner, young Dieter Vogel, scanned the tree line through binoculars. "Herr Feldwebel," he muttered, "they hit the supply column outside Dompierre yesterday. 2 shots, then silence. Not even the smell of their exhaust remained." Reiner grunted, unconvinced but wary. The fog ahead concealed more than landscape. It hid movement, rhythm, intent. Somewhere out there, American engines were idling low, waiting for the right sound. At 0900 hours, the first ambush came. A lead half-track exploded in a sudden burst of flame. Reiner barked orders. The Panzer turned toward the smoke. But the attack did not come from where he expected. A 76mm shell struck from the left flank, then another from behind. The enemy wasn't stationary. They were circling, hitting from multiple angles, vanishing between volleys. Through the chaos, Reiner caught glimpses of slender hulls darting across open ground, their turrets swiveling with a kind of mechanical grace. The M18 Hellcats of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion were living up to their name. Moving at speeds that defied German expectations, they darted through mud and hedges, changing positions every few minutes. Their crews relied on coordination and trust, each gunner firing, then relocating before German optics could find them. After the skirmish, when the smoke cleared, the forest floor was littered with wreckage, both American and German. The difference was stark. Most of the destroyed vehicles bore the marks of heavy guns, while others had burned out from their own ammunition igniting during retreat. For Reiner's men, the lesson was brutal. The old rules of engagement, distance, armor, methodical advance, no longer applied. War diaries from the German 11th Panzer Division record this shift with unusual candor. One officer wrote, "Our heavy armor has become our prison. Their vehicles move as cavalry once did, swift, uncatchable." That statement echoed the transformation unfolding across the Western Front. The Americans had turned technology into motion, and motion into dominance. The Hellcat's speed changed more than tactics. It changed morale. The Germans, long confident in their engineering, now faced a new fear: invisibility through movement. Rumors spread in mess tents and trenches that these light devils could appear behind enemy lines within minutes. Crews began sleeping inside their tanks, too afraid to dismount. But to the Americans, each victory was tempered by fragility. Their open turrets left crews exposed to snipers and mortars. The Hellcat's thin armor could be pierced even by handheld Panzerfausts. Survival was a balance between daring and calculation, a dance on the edge of annihilation. In the forests of Lorraine, the two philosophies of war collided in a deadly rhythm. The Germans relied on power, the Americans on pace. For every Tiger that advanced, a Hellcat waited in the wings, ready to strike and disappear. That autumn, Reiner began to grasp an uncomfortable truth. His beloved Panzer, once the apex of battlefield pride, was now prey. By November 1944, the forests of Lorraine had become a labyrinth of shattered armor and smoke. German tankers moved through the undergrowth like hunted animals, their tracks muffled with mud, their nerves fraying under the constant whisper of unseen engines. For Feldwebel Otto Reiner, every creak of metal was a warning. The once steady rhythm of armored war, the grind of treads, the deliberate precision of range-finding, had given way to chaos, to something that felt almost alive. He had fought the Red Army's fast T-34s and survived, but this was different. The Americans fought with movement as their creed. They didn't hold ground. They borrowed it, struck, and abandoned it again. Their tactics were fluid, improvisational, impossible to predict, and the machine that embodied that spirit was the M18 Hellcat. Captured American manuals recovered near Metz revealed the mindset behind it. One section, translated by German intelligence, read, "The Hellcat must never wait for the enemy to find it. Its advantage is the first shot, and its safety lies in speed." Those words puzzled the analysts at first. How could safety come from motion? But in practice, it was devastatingly simple. While German tanks lumbered into position, the Hellcat was already gone, its crew using trees, smoke, and sheer velocity to reset the battlefield. The impact was psychological as much as tactical. After-action reports from panzer brigades described a creeping uncertainty. Commanders hesitated, gunners second-guessed their aim, units fired at shadows. Even veterans like Reiner found themselves scanning for enemies that vanished as quickly as they appeared. It was as if the Americans had found a way to outrun time itself, one gunner wrote, in a letter never delivered. For the Americans, the experience was no less tense. Hellcat crews knew that one mistake, a stalled engine, a missed turn, meant death. They lived on coffee, nerves, and instinct, trusting in the machine's agility to keep them alive. In interviews decades later, veterans recalled how they measured success not in kills, but in seconds. "If we fired first, we lived," said Sergeant Leland. "If not, we didn't." The symbolism of speed began to take root in both armies. To the Americans, it was liberation, proof that courage could outrun fear. To the Germans, it became a ghostly force, stripping away their illusion of mechanical superiority. The forests themselves seemed to favor it. The M18's engine growl would echo, fade, and reappear miles away, confusing even experienced listeners. By winter, the word Hellcat had become a curse, muttered in dugouts and supply depots. Panzer crews painted makeshift camouflage on their hulls, praying to remain unseen. But no camouflage could save them from a philosophy that had already outpaced them. The descent of morale was complete. Reiner's crew, once proud defenders of the Reich's engineering might, now felt the weight of inevitability. "They move faster than we can think," he told his men one cold night, the frost glistening on their steel helmets. "And that is why we are losing." The idea of victory had slowed, just as surely as their engines had. The routine begins with the Americans who lived inside those Hellcats, their long days of waiting, maintenance, and moments of strange, fleeting calm between the hunts. In the fog-wrapped dawns of eastern France, the men of the N18 battalions woke to a ritual that was half machine and half meditation. Before first light, they checked every bolt, track, and fluid level, crawling across cold metal slick with dew. The Hellcat was a creature that demanded care, and in return, it offered speed, its only armor, its only mercy. Sergeant James Leland's crew knew this routine by muscle memory. Each morning, they spread their tools on a canvas laid across the frozen ground. Corporal Haskins tuned the engine like a musician, listening for the faintest irregular hum in the Continental R975 radial engine. Private Rousseau, the gunner, cleaned the 76mm barrel with reverence, as though the weapon itself had a soul. "If she's clean, she'll hit true," he always said. They were mechanics, soldiers, and artists of movement. Between battles, they existed in pockets of quiet. Long hours of waiting, card games on ammo crates, the smell of oil and cigarettes hanging thick in the air. The American camps in Lorraine were small worlds unto themselves, tents stitched from canvas and optimism, field kitchens that smelled faintly of coffee and canned peaches. What bound them together was rhythm. Even their rest was mechanical: sleep in shifts, eat fast, move light. To an outsider, it might have seemed monotonous, but within that repetition was purpose. The men believed that the Hellcat's magic lay not just in its speed, but in the discipline that made that speed possible. Letters home from these camps spoke of paradoxes. "We live in steel," one man wrote, "but it's the fastest thing I've ever known. When we move, it feels like freedom, even if it's through hell." The Hellcat itself became a kind of personality in their conversations. They named their tanks with affection: Hotfoot, Dixie Devil, Ida Red, as if speed could carry the echo of home. In truth, it did. Each motion, each repair, was a thread tying them back to something human amid the mechanical storm. And yet, even in those fleeting comforts, the men knew what waited. They understood that the enemy they hunted was still out there: Panther, Tiger, and fear itself. The slower, heavier beasts of the Reich were formidable, but the Americans had learned to dance around them. Still, that dance had a cost. The speed that saved them also wore them down. Every maneuver meant another burst of adrenaline, another brush with death. When dusk settled, the forest around them glowed with the dim orange of repair lamps. The men moved like shadows across their open-topped tanks, tightening tracks, reloading shells, and whispering about what the next dawn might bring. Their officers rarely spoke of grand strategy. Orders were simple. Move fast, hit first, don't stay still. It was a philosophy that seeped into their bones. Even when the Hellcats were parked and silent, the crews still twitched in their sleep, dreaming of acceleration, of the roar that had become their heartbeat. By late December, snow had begun to fall again. The war felt endless, but the men carried on with the same quiet rhythm, one task leading to the next. In that repetition, grease, reload, sleep, repeat, lay a strange kind of peace. The next section reveals the mirror image of that routine, the German tankers trapped in their own rituals of survival, haunted by the very speed that defined their enemy. Meanwhile, on the German side, the forests of Lorraine and the Ardennes were a very different world. Feldwebel Otto Reiner and his Panzer IV crew rose each morning to check treads thick with mud, lubricate creaking gears, and pray that the fuel they had would last another day. The tanks themselves seemed heavier now, sluggish against the frozen earth, and each engine cough or shudder was a reminder of vulnerability. The days blended together in a monotonous cadence. They moved slowly from hedgerow to village, scouted, and occasionally engaged with the elusive American forces. Yet every encounter with a Hellcat left its mark. Crews wrote in diaries about fleeting glimpses, a flash of olive-drab metal, a low growl, and then disappearance. Each sighting was a jolt, a reminder that the rules they had relied on no longer applied. Inside the tanks, soldiers sought distractions to keep morale alive. Letters to loved ones, whispered jokes, or the careful rationing of chocolate and cigarettes became rituals. Reiner's gunner, Vogel, kept a small harmonica tucked in his vest and would play softly during halts, the faint notes a fragile bridge to a world outside destruction. These small human acts, song, letter, story, were lifelines, a counterpoint to the relentless tension outside the steel hull. The forests themselves seemed complicit in the pattern of routine. Mud, trees, and snow created a rhythm the Germans could anticipate: narrow passes, choke points, and ambush sites. Yet the Hellcats defied rhythm. They turned corners before German gunners could align their sights, accelerated across open fields, and vanished into foliage, leaving nothing but smoke and panic. The contrast between the Americans' flowing mobility and the Germans' laborious patterns was stark, and each day reinforced the anxiety of inevitability. Supply lines were a constant concern. Fuel shortages, mechanical breakdowns, and sporadic artillery fire ensured that even the simplest movement required calculation and patience. Every morning felt like preparation for a battle that could erupt in seconds. Soldiers adjusted their routines accordingly, shifting positions at dawn, sleeping in short bursts, rationing food and firepower. The monotony of survival was punctuated by sudden, lethal encounters, making time both friend and enemy. Through the harsh repetition, the motif of speed persisted in their consciousness. It was not only the physical swiftness of the M18 Hellcat that unnerved them, but the philosophy it represented: decisive, relentless, and unpredictable. Each engagement reminded Reiner's crew that victory was no longer a measure of armor or firepower alone. Survival required awareness, flexibility, and a grudging respect for motion itself. By the time Christmas of 1944 approached, both sides had settled into their rhythms. The Americans balanced speed with discipline, maintaining their fragile yet effective machines. The Germans relied on ritualized maintenance and methodical progress, always haunted by the specter of something faster, sharper, and more elusive. It was within this clash of routines that the war's next turning point began to crystallize. Speed had become more than a tool. It was the arbiter of life and death, shaping decisions, morale, and the very psychology of combat. The turning point begins with the Battle of the Bulge, where the interplay of terrain, weather, and velocity would test both philosophies to their limits. December 16th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow fell in thick sheets, muffling sound and freezing the ground beneath the treads of both Panzer and Hellcat. Feldwebel Otto Reiner hunched inside his Panzer IV, watching the white blur through the periscope. Reports had arrived of an unexpected Allied push, a massive counter-offensive aimed not at attrition, but at shock. Reiner could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on his shoulders, the kind that no amount of training could alleviate. For the Americans, the Ardennes presented a different challenge. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had learned to exploit speed, but the frozen roads and dense forest tested every assumption. Sergeant James Leland recalled in later interviews the delicate calculus: ice, mud, visibility, and the constant threat of German anti-tank ambushes. Every second counted, and every hesitation could be fatal. The first major clash came near the village of Clairvaux. Reiner's unit, tasked with halting the advance, moved cautiously along narrow, icy lanes. Suddenly, a distant metallic roar reached his ears, a low growl unlike anything he had encountered in France or Lorraine. Before he could react, the forest erupted with motion. Hellcats surged along flanks, their speed amplified by the snow-laden roads, striking Panther and Tiger units with coordinated precision. The battle devolved into a surreal interplay of motion and fire. Reiner's Panzer fired at flashes, shells detonating against trees or missing their targets entirely. The Hellcats slipped through openings no German tank could safely exploit, leaving wrecked Panthers and stunned crews in their wake. In the chaos, Reiner realized the full psychological impact. Their belief in invulnerability was shattered. Speed, not mass, had become decisive. Captured American orders from the 704th detail the strategy: strike first, exploit gaps, avoid prolonged engagement, preserve velocity as armor. It was a philosophy that merged mechanical capability with mental acuity. The German crews, conditioned to measured advances and frontal duels, were outmatched not by firepower alone, but by tempo. Each engagement compressed time, leaving Reiner's men reacting instead of acting. By the second day, the snow-covered battlefield bore witness to the transformation. German morale wavered, units fragmented, confused by assaults that seemed to appear from nowhere. Reiner's own log, later captured and archived, reflected a tone of dawning comprehension. They move faster than we can think, and in that speed lies their power. To stop them, we must abandon our doctrine. For the American crews, the rhythm of speed and evasion became intoxicating. Each maneuver tested skill, courage, and nerve. Leland described it as a dance. One moment, you're on the flank, checking the horizon. The next, you're slipping between trees, firing, and gone before they even see you. It's exhilarating and terrifying. Yet the Hellcat's advantage was not absolute. Their open turrets left crews exposed to winter artillery and sniper fire, and any mechanical failure in the cold could be fatal. The battalion learned quickly that speed alone could not guarantee survival. It required coordination, discipline, and intuition. As night fell, both sides took stock. The Germans, exhausted and battered, realized the forest no longer offered sanctuary. Reiner's crew huddled inside their panzer, listening to the faint growls that echoed like specters through the snow. The lesson was stark. Their world had shifted. Speed, once a novelty, had become the arbiter of survival and the catalyst of despair. By December 18, 1944, the Ardennes was a battlefield of shifting shadows and broken steel. Reiner's Panzer IV limped along a snow-choked road, its tracks slipping against icy ruts. Each movement was slow, deliberate, but behind the tree line, the Americans were already repositioning. The Hellcats moved with uncanny timing, striking columns before the Germans could form coherent defenses. The motif of speed, once abstract, was now an oppressive reality. For German crews, the concept of armored superiority had been inverted. Each encounter reinforced that mass and firepower could not outmatch swiftness and audacity. Reiner recorded in his diary, "Our tanks feel like castles under siege from wind and ghosts. They appear, strike, vanish. How do you fight that?" The words were heavy with frustration and awe. American crews faced their own crucible. Maneuvering through forests layered in snow required precision. One slip could render the Hellcat a tomb. Yet each successful engagement bolstered confidence. Sergeant Leland wrote in a field journal, later declassified, "The faster we move, the safer we are. Speed is our shield, and it teaches fear to those who would pursue us." In this theater, velocity had become both armor and weapon. The Battle of the Bulge's first week saw the Americans exploiting their mechanized tempo to maximum effect. Hellcats ambushed supply convoys, isolated German units, and cut communication lines. Reiner's division, accustomed to methodical advances, was forced into improvisation. Some crews attempted counter-ambushes, only to find themselves caught by the same speed they could not match. Morale deteriorated as panic spread along the ranks. Amid the chaos, a few moments of human detail pierced the tension. Reiner's gunner, Vogel, scribbled letters to his family on scraps of paper, hiding them in the turret. A young Hellcat driver shared a photo of his hometown with his crew before another dawn raid. These small acts of humanity contrasted sharply with the mechanical fury surrounding them, revealing that even in war, rhythm and routine remained tethered to the human heart. By December 23rd, the momentum had clearly shifted. The Germans were retreating, their once formidable lines fragmented. The Hellcats, though lightly armored, had imposed a new standard. The battle was won by who moved first, struck hard, and withdrew before being pinned. The lessons of Lorraine and early Ardennes engagements had culminated here. The American philosophy of speed and initiative was now decisive. Reiner, staring at the frozen forest as night fell, finally understood the symbolic truth that had guided every Hellcat encounter. Speed was not merely a trait of machines, it was a reflection of human adaptability, courage, and ingenuity. The slow, ponderous might of the Panzer was no match for a force that treated movement itself as a weapon. The collapse, escape, and liberation follow as the Ardennes campaign concludes revealing the end of German resistance and the ultimate reckoning of speed versus mass on European soil. January 1st, 1945. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The new year arrived with a bitter wind that cut through the tattered uniforms of retreating German tank crews. Feldwebel Otto Reiner guided his damaged Panzer IV along a forest road lined with splintered trees and frozen mud. The air smelled of smoke, diesel, and the lingering scent of human fear. Across the snow-slicked landscape, the echoes of American engines seemed endless, weaving through the tree line with the same ghostly elusiveness that had haunted the Germans for weeks. Supply lines had collapsed. Food was scarce, ammunition even scarcer. Morale, already fragile after weeks of relentless harassment by the M18 Hellcats, now teetered on despair. Reiner's crew had witnessed Panther units immobilized by mud and Tiger crews pinned by ambushes. Speed and initiative, once merely a tactical observation, had become a weapon against them. Every hour that passed without engagement felt like a reprieve, yet each hour brought the inevitability of another American assault. The Americans, conversely, were disciplined in motion. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had perfected the rhythm of attack, rapid reconnaissance, striking isolated targets, and withdrawal before reinforcements could respond. Field diaries show that crews calculated maneuvers in seconds, timing acceleration, line of sight, and terrain with almost surgical precision. Sergeant James Leland's unit navigated the icy roads like dancers in a deadly ballet, their Hellcats' engines purring beneath the snow like wild predators. Reiner's awareness of their vulnerability was constant. Every rustle in the trees, every distant growl of an engine could signal a fatal encounter. The forest no longer offered concealment. It had become a stage for the relentless choreography of speed. Even seasoned crews found themselves second-guessing positions, retreating preemptively and surrendering initiative simply to survive. Captured dispatches from the German 9th Panzer Division describe a chilling sense of inevitability. We no longer fight the Americans. We run from the shadows they cast. Our tanks are monuments to past certainty. Their speed dictates the present. It was a recognition of a new order, one where ingenuity and motion outpaced brute strength and mechanical might. In towns like Bastogne, the collapsing lines forced improvisation. Reiner's unit commandeered civilian trucks to move what remained of supplies, navigating streets littered with wreckage and snowdrifts. Every crossing felt like a gamble. American Hellcats, their engines barely audible beneath the wind, could strike at any moment. The once proud German formations dissolved into isolated pockets where survival depended less on tactics than on instinct. Yet amid the collapse, fragments of humanity persisted. German crews helped wounded comrades along icy roads, shared meager rations, and whispered hope into the ears of the frightened. On the American side, Hellcat crews occasionally encountered captured Germans and treated them with pragmatic restraint, understanding that war's cruelty was mitigated by discipline as much as by speed. By the mid-morning of January 6th, the retreat had turned into a rout. Reiner's panzer, stripped of armor patches and bearing the scars of combat, barely crept forward as the first American columns pressed the attack. The forests, once a place of tactical opportunity, now funneled them toward inevitable capture or annihilation. The M18s, moving faster than thought, were closing the net. For Reiner, the meaning of speed had evolved from tactical novelty to existential truth. Survival no longer relied on the strength of steel, but on the ability to anticipate adapt, and endure the relentless motion of the enemy. By January 3, 1945, the Ardennes campaign had reached its climax. The German defenses, already fragmented, began to crumble entirely. Reiner's Panzer IV, limping along a narrow, snow-choked lane, was one of the last in its company. Around him, abandoned tanks lay half buried in snow, their turrets twisted, a stark testament to the velocity of American assault. The forest that had once promised cover now revealed only the limits of armor and human endurance. The Hellcats, in contrast, moved like specters over the white expanse. Each vehicle struck targets and vanished, leaving the Germans struggling to process the chaos. The Americans had learned to fight not just with weapons, but with timing, motion, and psychological pressure. Where once Reiner could anticipate enemy maneuvers, now he reacted, and often too slowly. By mid-afternoon, he witnessed his comrades surrendering, climbing out of their tanks, hands raised against a backdrop of smoke and shattered trees. In the villages scattered along the Ardennes, the liberation was both physical and symbolic. Civilians, long under the shadow of retreating forces and sporadic skirmishes, watched as the American speed and precision restored order. Hellcat crews assisted where possible, directing traffic, aiding wounded, and sometimes sharing rations, demonstrating that velocity in war need not preclude humanity. Reports from the U.S. Army Historical Division note that German POWs expressed a mix of astonishment and relief at their treatment, remarking on the strange juxtaposition of destructive capability and restraint. For Reiner, surrender was an emotional paradox. After months of retreat, ambushes, and fear, stepping away from the Panzer meant leaving behind not only his vehicle, but a lifetime of pride in mechanized warfare. Yet the speed and efficiency of the American advance had rendered resistance futile. In letters later preserved at the German War Archives, he wrote, "The Americans move with a certainty we cannot match. To survive, we lay down our arms and follow their rhythm." The forests of Lorraine and Ardennes, once arenas of armored pride, now served as corridors for prisoners being led away from the front. The Hellcat's speed had not only dictated the outcome of battles, but had rewritten the psychological landscape of war. German soldiers carried with them the lasting impression of a force that struck first, moved faster, and dictated the tempo of every encounter. By late January, the final German resistance in the Ardennes was dissolved. Reiner and his remaining crew were transported to collection points, the motion of their captivity ironically mirroring the very principle that had defeated them: relentless momentum. The forests, scarred by combat, bore witness to the contrast between the heavy, ponderous tanks of the Reich and the agile, decisive force of American mechanization. As the Hellcats returned to staging areas, cleaned and repaired for future operations, their crews reflected on the campaign's lessons. Speed had emerged not merely as a mechanical advantage, but as a strategic philosophy. The ability to move, strike, and adapt was now inseparable from the concept of victory. The collapse of German resistance and the survival of those who surrendered highlighted the dual power of motion, destructive in battle, redemptive in restraint. The aftermath begins in the quiet months that followed, where Reiner, his crew, and the captured soldiers confronted the human cost of speed and motion, revisiting forests and villages that had once been theaters of terror. Spring 1945, Lorraine and Ardennes, Europe. The forests were silent now, snow replaced by the tentative green of new growth. The scars of battle remained in churned earth, blackened tree trunks and abandoned armor, slowly rusting into the soil. Feldwebel Otto Reiner walked among the remnants of his Panzer division, accompanied by a few comrades who had survived surrender and captivity. The air was heavy with the scent of thawing mud and the faint tang of burned metal. For the first time in months, the war seemed distant, yet its weight pressed upon every step. Reiner's thoughts returned often to the M18 Hellcat. In letters preserved in the German war archives, he reflected, "It was not merely a weapon, but an idea. Speed as armor, speed as fate. We could not outthink it, only endure it." The forests, which had once been both protector and trap, now seemed to carry whispers of the relentless movement that had defined the past months. For the Americans, the end of hostilities brought a different rhythm. Crews cleaned, repaired, and prepared their Hellcats for redeployment or decommissioning. Soldiers wrote home, chronicled their experiences, and attempted to reconcile the exhilaration of mobility with the loss they had witnessed. Sergeant James Leland, in his diary, noted the strange duality of their triumph. "We moved faster than death, but we carried its shadow in every corner of the forest." Across Europe, captured German soldiers underwent the slow process of adjustment. In US-run camps, they were fed, clothed, and given medical attention. Many marveled at the efficiency and resources of their captors, contrasting it with the destruction that had defined their own advance. For Reiner and his men, the experience was both humbling and illuminating. They had faced a technology and a philosophy that transcended metal and tactics, the human capacity to think, adapt, and move with purpose. Some former tankers returned to the Ardennes months later to witness the forest in a new light. Children played where foxholes had been dug, livestock grazed among the craters of destroyed tanks, and sunlight filtered through the regenerating canopy. The speed that had defined their defeat was invisible now, yet its lesson remained indelible. Veterans' accounts describe a solemn awe at how swiftly human ingenuity could dominate a landscape, and how rapidly that dominance could fade when war moved on. Even in archives and museums, the M18 Hellcat is remembered less for its gun than for the philosophy it embodied. Speed, coordination, and initiative, a doctrine executed with both precision and audacity, became a benchmark not only in armored warfare, but in military thinking for decades to come. For the soldiers who had faced it, its legacy was both mechanical and psychological. The human dimension of the aftermath was undeniable. Letters, diaries, and oral histories reveal moments of reconciliation, reflection, and quiet understanding between former enemies. Soldiers like Reiner returned home, carrying memories of pursuit and survival, of forests alive with motion, and of machines that seemed to anticipate thought itself. The war had ended, but the lessons of velocity, initiative, and adaptation endured. The full measure of that endurance would emerge in the final reflections of captured German crews as they confronted both their own mortality and the indelible imprint of speed upon history. By late spring 1945, the forests of Lorraine and Ardennes had begun to heal, yet the memory of steel, fire, and speed lingered in every hollowed tree and scarred hillside. Feldwebel Otto Reiner sat on a log beside what remained of a frozen river, watching the sun shimmer across the thawing water. His Panzer IV, once a vessel of pride and purpose, was gone, stripped, burned, or claimed by the slow reclamation of nature. Yet the lessons it had imparted were permanent: survival, adaptability, and the relentless calculus of motion. Letters sent to families detailed this strange juxtaposition. One note described the irony that the fastest enemy had spared their lives while crushing their defenses. Another reflected on the quiet moments, the sounds of engines at dawn, the rhythm of speed, and the way life persisted amid destruction. Reiner wrote, "We were heavy, deliberate, and sure. They were swift, relentless, and decisive. And in that contrast, we lived to remember." For the American crews, the Hellcats returned to depots, some slated for training, others to be retired. In interviews decades later, veterans recalled the intensity of Ardennes' winter, the endless calculation of seconds, and the strange intimacy formed with their machines. Speed had not only saved lives, but had shaped perception. It was a weapon, yes, but also a teacher, demonstrating the power of anticipation, coordination, and decisiveness in ways the Germans could scarcely counter. Meanwhile, captured German soldiers were processed, cared for, and gradually reintegrated into a world that had changed as drastically as they had. POW camps became temporary classrooms of reflection. Veterans of mechanized warfare studied not only the machinery of their captors, but also the philosophy behind it. They learned that mobility, initiative, and adaptability were as decisive as armor and firepower. Many would carry these insights into post-war careers in engineering, strategy, and even civilian industry, where the principles of speed and efficiency had been hammered into their consciousness on frozen battlefields. Reiner returned to Germany months later to a nation scarred, rebuilding, and quietly examining its failures. He carried photographs, letters, and vivid memories of the forested battlefields. His perspective had shifted. The speed that had once seemed terrifying now appeared almost elegant, a testament to human ingenuity harnessed through machinery. In later memoirs, he described walking along the Ardennes trails with his grandchildren, pointing out craters and shell fragments, and explaining that the greatest force was not always the heaviest, but often the fastest, the most decisive, and the most disciplined in motion. Across Europe, historians and archivists would later echo these sentiments. The M18 Hellcat campaigns in France and the Ardennes became case studies in the transformation of armored warfare. Speed and initiative, once overshadowed by armor and firepower, had dictated outcomes, reshaped strategy, and influenced post-war doctrine. Soldiers, veterans, and scholars alike recognized that war was no longer simply a matter of might, but of motion, timing, and human adaptability. The forests grew quiet, yet the lessons persisted. Reiner, the men of his crew, and countless others returned to civilian life, carrying the echo of engines, the rhythm of battle, and the haunting awareness of speed as both adversary and teacher. They understood that the true measure of a weapon lay not only in its construction, but in how its philosophy reshaped those who encountered it. If this story moved you, subscribe to POW Tales, where every silence of war finds its voice again.